So, good evening. This evening, I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to give my talk first, and then, oh no, heaven forbid, things might change. I'm going to give my talk first, and then we're going to meditate. And one reason for that is I want you to be able to practice with what I'm going to talk about. So I want to do a quick survey here. So if you would, please close your eyes. That includes all of you on Zoom. I can't see the people on Zoom. Most of you have your video off. So now nobody can see your responses. How many of you would consider breath awareness the first thing you do when you begin a meditation period? Raise your hand. Okay, all right. Thank you. Now, keeping your eyes closed, how many of you, once the attention is stable on the breath, how many of you have a clear idea what to do next? Okay, not as many hands, which is what I would expect. Thank you. You can open your eyes. So a common question I hear is there anything more to this meditation practice than just watching the breath? And the answer is yes. So for tonight's purposes, I want you to think about 3 stages of practice, and each one of them I'm going to discuss for a few minutes. The first is breath awareness. So here the purpose is to calm the mind, and the result will be a mind, if we're lucky, the result will be a mind that is not whipsawed around by whatever thoughts happen to wander through. I say if we're lucky, and if we're diligent. Now the second stage, if you will, would be what I'm going to refer to as open awareness. So once the mind is stable, we can relinquish the breath as our primary object. I know that sounds like I'm a heretic, but and we can observe the moment-to-moment flow of experience at the sense doors. And this observation that we're doing opens the way for the third stage, which is contemplation. So this flow of moment-to-moment experience invites reflection on one of the Buddha's key teachings, the 3 characteristics of existence. First one being impermanence or unreliability. The second one being suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And the third one being not self or selflessness. And this resulting mind state from contemplation is fertile ground for the arising of insight or wisdom. And that is the culmination of this path of insight meditation. So I hope that's clear. So let's begin with, on these 3, let's begin with breath awareness. So let me say that I'm going to share my understanding of breath awareness practice. And I want to be quick to state that there are different understandings about this. To the best of our ability, we look to the words of the Buddha. But the Buddha, his teachings were handed down orally for several hundred years before they were committed to writing, and when they were written down in the Pali language, not the English language. So what we now have is an English-speaking person's translation of a Pali record that was transmitted orally for several hundred years. More accurately, what we have is numerous English-speaking people's translations, and they don't all agree. So the first question that might arise is, where do I attend to the breath? And honest people can disagree about the answer to this question. The two most widely accepted answers are either at the tip of the nostrils or the upper lip, or number two, anywhere in the body that is most accessible. And you've probably heard people teach both of those. Personally, I find the first answer is the most useful for me, and I recommend it to you. And if you find it's not effective for you, then maybe you find there's another place in your body where the breath is more accessible, then you can always use that as your focus. But my suggestion is to try to train yourself in the first method, that is breath awareness at the tip of the nostril or on the upper lip. So another question that arises is, what does it mean to attend to the breath? So in the context of insight meditation, attending to an object involves being continuously mindful of that object. Here's what Bhikkhu Bodhi has to say about mindfulness. Some of you know Bhikkhu Bodhi. He's a respected monk, Buddhist monk and scholar and practitioner. He says, with the practice of mindfulness, awareness is applied at a special pitch. The mind is deliberately kept at the level of bare attention, a detached observation of what is happening within us and around us in the present moment. In ordinary consciousness, the mind begins a cognitive process with some impression given in the present. So present moment awareness, we get an impression, but then we take it and we begin this cognitive process. But it does not stay with that impression. Instead, it uses the immediate impression as a springboard for building mental constructs. As a result, what we know as the final object of cognition and what we use as the basis for our values and our plans and our actions is a patchwork product, not the original article. So we're no longer seeing clearly, mindfully, what we began with. Being continuously mindful of the breath is not the same thing as continuously thinking about the breath. I'm going to say that again. Being continuously mindful of the breath is not the same thing as continuously thinking about the breath. Thinking about something involves engaging the mind with mental constructs about an object, as opposed to just staying with your moment-to-moment experience. The mind can only attend to one thing at a time, and mental proliferation about the breath, thinking about the breath, a string of thoughts around the breath, that involves putting our thoughts about that initial moment as a higher priority than observing the next moment. We can only do one thing at a time. So if we're going to think about our contact with the breath that we just had, we're going to do it in the next moment. And we're placing thinking about the last moment as more important than being fully present for that second moment. Is that clear? So, for example, we might have a tickle in the nostril, and we notice that. And if we're practicing correctly, mindfully, we will be aware of the tickle and we'll say, okay, what's happening in the next moment? Is it still there? Is it gone? Doesn't matter, whatever's presenting. But if we're not practicing mindfully, we'll start thinking about the tickle in our nostril. You know, do I have a nose hair sticking out? What if it's a booger? What if somebody sees it? You know, all the stuff the mind comes up with. And so what we want to do is be with the experience, not think about the experience. It also, breath awareness doesn't include what you learned about the anatomy of the lungs in the 8th grade, and it doesn't include controlling the breath in any way. It's simply moment-to-moment experience. So now I want to ask you to join me in an exercise, if you would. If you would, close your eyes, please. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to touch your nostrils with your finger. Everybody's got their eyes closed. Nobody's going to think you're picking your nose. But I want you to focus on the contact of your finger with the skin at the nostrils. Just see what that feels like. Okay, thank you. Now, next, place one hand in front of your face and blow on your hand. Focus on the contact of air on the skin of your hand. Thank you. Now, let's put these two together. I want you to exhale sharply, and I want you to focus on the tactile sensation of contact at the nostrils of air moving across skin. So sharp exhale, sharp inhale, focusing on the sensation of air moving across skin. You can take your hands down and just focus on air moving across skin at the nostrils. And then finally, let's return to normal breathing, but let's retain this focus of air moving across skin at the nostrils. This is what we're after when we practice breath awareness. Okay, you may open your eyes, please. Before I go on, any questions about that? Did everybody kind of able to follow that? Okay. So have you ever started a meditation period with the best intentions only to lose steam a few minutes in? I know I have. The prospect of maintaining continuous awareness of the breath for the entire period can be daunting, particularly when we can't even make it through a few breaths. So what I'd like for you to do now is close your eyes again, and rather than 30 minutes, just for 3 minutes, let's practice breath awareness as we just did. Bear attention to the tactile sensation of air moving across skin at the nostrils. And be particularly alert when coming to the end of an in-breath or an out-breath. This is where we often lose our mindfulness and the mind drifts away. Please apply yourself diligently. This is a very short experiment, and it will give you information that will be useful to you. I'll ring the bell in 3 minutes. Okay. So how was that? Anybody have anything they want to ask or report about that little experiment?
Where the air goes in and out of the nose, or our lungs go up and down. Why not focus on the lungs and the air going in and out versus the nose?
Okay, the question is, the chest, the lungs are also moving. Why not focus there? You can focus there. Some people teach that if that's most available to you, that's where you should focus. My suggestion is nose, unless it doesn't work for you. Your question is why. There are many scholarly discussions of that. And maybe if this would be a good, it depends on how you understand the Pali term that is used to document the Buddha's instruction. I didn't practice this way until about 10 years ago. And once I discovered this, it was much more helpful for me. That's why I recommend it. It's what I know to work for me. Different people understand this Pali term differently, and I'm not advocating that my understanding is correct, just that it's most effective for me. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Yes. Okay. So we talked a little bit about breath awareness. The second topic is open awareness. And in open awareness, that's sometimes referred to as choiceless awareness. We relinquish the breath as our primary object of meditation, and we open to the moment-to-moment flow of experience at our sense doors. So here's how Ajahn Amaro, Buddhist monk and teacher and author, this is how he says it. When the mind rests easily with the present, one can let go of the breath as a special object. The whole of the present moment then becomes the focus. This is because the point of the exercise is not to become an expert breather or someone who is totally obsessed with the breath. The point is to train the attention to focus on the present. As a result of this training, there is an open-hearted awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. This includes the feelings of the body, sounds, thoughts, and emotions that might arise. The training is to let them come, let them take their shape, perform their function, and dissolve and fade away. So open awareness accepts each moment of contact at any one of the 6 sense gates. So if I had a little more time, I'd kind of go through the seeing, hearing, there's an organ, there's an object, there's contact. I think most of us have a pretty good idea of that. The Buddha understood, and I believe, we have a 6th sense, which is the mind. That's the organ. Thinking, broadly understood, is the object, and when there's contact, mental activity occurs. And so as we practice open awareness in this way, we see a rising of contact at the sense gates, and it'll be one and then another, a sound and then a thought and then a feeling in the body, and then, just a continuous stream. So we just watch as those arise and pass away. Now, if the mind becomes unstable, which particularly as we're learning this practice will happen, we just drop right back to breath awareness. That's kind of our anchor. And then with the breath awareness, we restabilize ourselves. And then when we feel stable, we move back into open awareness again. So one of the challenges in maintaining open awareness, one of the things that causes us to wobble and not stay steady, is the defilements of desire and aversion and ignorance. And I just want to talk about those three for a moment. It can be difficult to see the arising of ignorance because, guess what? By definition, we're in a moment of delusion. So it's hard to see ignorance arising when we're buried in ignorance. But the arising of both desire and aversion are more accessible, and we can think of them both under the umbrella of wanting. Desire is wanting things to be a certain way, and aversion is wanting things to not be a certain way. In her book, Pure and Simple, Thai laywoman and renowned Dharma teacher Upasika Key referred repeatedly to the stress of defilement and the stress of sensory contact. And in this case, the term stress is a translation of dukkha, which is often translated as unsatisfactoriness or suffering. So she's saying the suffering of the defilements, the suffering of sensory contact. What she's saying is that for the untrained mind, every moment of sense contact, pleasant or unpleasant, involves the defilements and therefore dukkha. She goes on to say, take a good look at the violence the defilements do to you to see whether you should keep socializing with them, whether you should regard them as your friends or your enemies. And she's suggesting that we might mistake them for our friends because they are so seductive. We labor under the illusion being the defilement of ignorance. We labor under the illusion that if we can just get what we want, we'll be satisfied. But it doesn't work that way. Not only will our untrained minds just move on to the next object of desire, but succumbing to wanting will just strengthen the dynamic, the habit of wanting, and it'll make it more difficult in the future. So, open awareness is kind of the second part, and our challenge is going to be the defilements of, broadly speaking, wanting things to be a way or not a way. So just a few thoughts about the third topic, contemplation. We've looked at the process of breath awareness, we've looked at the practice of open awareness, and now we see that the arising contact at the sense doors naturally brings dukkha to the untrained mind. As we see through the arising of defilements, we can begin to examine them. What is causing this particular thought to arise at this moment? What underlies the thought? Who is thinking this thought? That last question might sound a bit odd, but let's look at it. This investigation takes us into the landscape of not self or selflessness, the third of the three characteristics that I mentioned earlier. Now, this is understood to be an advanced teaching, and I believe that it is, but that's no reason to be afraid of it. The sooner we begin to familiarize ourselves with it, the sooner we will make progress in our understanding. So one frequent misunderstanding is that the Buddha taught there is no self. That's not true. It's understandable because the term not self can sound like no self, but they're different. In his book, Selves and Not Self, and this is a transcription of a series of Dharma talks that he gave, Thanissaro Bhikkhu says, if you remember only one thing from these talks, remember this: the Buddha in teaching not self was not answering the question of whether there is or isn't a self. The question is one he explicitly put aside. What the Buddha did teach is that we don't have a fixed, permanent self, which is the perception of the untrained mind. And a full exploration of not-self is beyond the scope of tonight's talk, but the important thing to know is that we have many different selves. We have a self with our co-workers. We have a self with our family members and with our Sangha members. And we have a self with our family of origin, and on and on and on. Sometimes when we're together with people from different groups, it can be a little awkward. Which self are we going to be when there's more than one group of people present? We unconsciously assume and abandon our different selves in a flash, depending on our circumstances. So now, returning to contemplation, the question, who is thinking this thought, can be really instructive. Each arising thought is associated with one of our many selves. By identifying the self from which the thought is arising, we can begin to investigate the defilement that underlies it. What is the unmet need or the craving that is causing this particular self to arise at this particular time? And we know craving has a central place in the Buddhist teachings as being the source of dukkha, or suffering. So we practice contemplation. We examine the presence of the three characteristics. I was talking about selflessness, but we examine impermanence or unreliability. We examine dukkha, which is unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and we examine selflessness or not self. And it can be a little difficult at first, but if we persist, we start to see that this awareness becomes more and more natural for us, and they're more accessible as we persist. So as we train our minds in this way, the stage is set for the arising of, guess what? Insight or wisdom, which is the culmination of this path. So that's the idea. Breath awareness stabilizes the mind. Open awareness allows us to move into a space where we can then progress into contemplation, which prepares us for the arising of insight. And now we have a chance to see if that works.